Well, good morning there, good people of the world. It's the Big Heavy, and we're talking camp coffee this morning. And if you're not a coffee drinker, maybe you're rolling your eyes, and I get it. I feel you. I was you once too. I didn't drink coffee until my 30s and lived in Italy for a while and saw how it was an afternoon ritual to have an espresso and gesticulate wildly and say things in Italian, and that's when I got hooked. I think it's a fun part of camping, particularly car camping. You know, you're kind of sitting around in the morning. Maybe you're the first person that's up and out of the tent, like I often am. And you kind of go through that ritual of assembling everything, getting your pot together, throwing that on the stove, and then having that first cup while you wait for your companions to join you. And apologies for the little airplanes circling above. It's been quiet all weekend, but for whatever reason this morning, it's airplane day. 4 types of camp coffee that I think are relevant, and I think there is one that's generally the best depending on what kind of group you're going with. First one is essentially instant coffee. So this is everything from your Folgers crystals to those little Starbucks Via packets that come in a small, tiny little straw thing. I think those are something I generally use for backpacking. They don't taste very good in my opinion. I don't really like Starbucks coffee, so that kind of is a strike against them. There are some other brands, but Starbucks is the one you're most likely to find in your average grocery store. They're small, they're light, they're easy. You just throw them in boiling water, stir them around, and the crystals essentially dissolve, and you've got a passable, warm, caffeinated beverage to start your morning off. I don't think those are very good if you're going with more than one person or if weight is not a concern. They're more expensive than some of the other methods. They're not as good. They kind of take some of that ritual out that I think is part of the fun. So method number 2 that I think is great and what I use on a trip where I'm sort of concerned about weight but not super concerned, so something like bike touring, and it's generally just me, is I would use a French press. I have one that works with my jet broil stove. There's a bunch that are, they use a little plastic vessel and a plunger, so you're not adding a ton of weight, particularly if you can use that little plastic vessel for multiple things. You're just carrying the weight of the plunger. You use regular old coffee grounds, so you can pick whatever coffee you like. You can even grind your own if that's your thing. Preparation in the morning is as simple as boiling a bunch of water, putting it in your little French press vessel, stirring your favorite coffee in there, letting it sit for a couple minutes, and then pushing down on the plunger, and you got yourself a pretty decent cup. That's what I used for a while. The one thing I don't like about the French press, at least the one I have, it's generally a little bit short for 2 people. Method number 3, which is what I generally use when car camping, is a percolator. Now, this is your old school big silver pot. I think there's a little bit of, romanticism about that. It looks like, what you saw in the cowboy movies when a bunch of cowpokes were sitting around the fire having their coffee in the morning. It generally produces a pretty high volume of coffee. I think you can get them up to, 18 cup versions down to 6-8 cup versions. And it's pretty easy to use. You basically take your favorite coffee. One nuance here is if you can, I would get a more of a coarse grind to your coffee beans. If you get the typical standard kind of fine grind that you use for drip, some of it will leak out of the top part of the percolator, the little basket thing, and you end up, the very last cup of there, you got some sludge in there, which the mitigation for that is just avoid that very last cup. But if you can get a little thicker grind, you take the basket out, fill it up with coffee, put the lid on, fill your pot up with water, put the little funnel thing in, put your basket in, put the top in, close it up, throw it on your stove, and basically just let it rock. And then when you see a little bit of brown colored water popping up in the percolator, then you start your timer for a couple minutes. You can go a little longer if you like it a little stronger, a little shorter if you like it a little weaker. I find 2 minutes does a pretty nice job, and I'm more towards the strong side. And then you're set. And the nice thing about the percolator, you got a big old metal pot, keeps things warm for a little while. So, if you're the first one having that cup and your peeps are coming out a little later, they don't get a nice cold cup of coffee as you would with a French press. I think the French press tends to cool down a little quicker. Final set of coffee methods is, what I'll call the specialist machines, for lack of a better phrase. That's kind of this 4th basket. And in there, I would include the Aeropress. Aeropress, a lot of people rave about, makes essentially 1 cup at a time of pretty strong coffee. It essentially makes you an espresso, and you can add hot water if you want a more traditional Americano, but you're dealing with 1 cup at a time. The pros are it's lightweight. You can get super fancy with it. There's coffee stores that actually use Aeropresses because they think it makes a superior cup of coffee. That's one option. Again, not a great option if you're traveling with multiple people, unless you want to spend a whole bunch of time dealing with coffee, versus the percolator. It's kind of one bit of process and then you're done for everyone. The other thing which my wife actually got me for my birthday, which is kind of cool, is the Waco portable espresso machine. So this is a little capsule looking thing, comes in a neat little case. You take some espresso grind, put it in a little basket, and it's actually kind of similar to a full-blown espresso maker. You've got a little tiny version of a portafilter, fill that with coffee, you fill some boiling water in there, you pump it up, and it actually uses air pressure to drive the water through the coffee as a regular espresso machine would. Makes a pretty decent cup, has a little espresso glass with it. It's probably borderline a little heavy for backpacking if you're going ultralight, although size-wise you could throw it in your pack and have yourself an espresso. I brought along this trip for a little afternoon espresso. We like to have a little coffee in the afternoon and generally either bring a can of iced coffee or we'll have a couple espressos from that machine. There's your 4 camp coffee methods. Big Heavy, obviously not at camp when I'm putting in this segment, but I wanted to include one other method of coffee making that I forgot in that original video, since I think it's a good one to know about because it's easy, doesn't require any special equipment, and that's what I've always heard referred to as Cowboy Coffee. Maybe there's a different, more culturally appropriate term for that. But essentially, Cowboy Coffee is as simple as boiling a pot of water, putting in some coffee. Generally you'd go about a healthy tablespoon per cup of water. You can kind of eyeball it. Doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. Stirring it around once you take that boiling pot off the heat and let it sit for maybe 6-8 minutes. You got to let it sit for a while. And what happens is the coffee will obviously seep into the water, much like you would with a tea bag or something like that. The coffee grounds will sink down to the bottom. And again, a larger ground helps for this. And then if you rather carefully pour the coffee out of that pot, you'll hopefully not get too many grounds in your glass of coffee. Now, I've used this method a few times before I had any kind of coffee makers. It's good for backpacking because all you're carrying additionally, assuming you already have a stove of some sort and a pot to boil water in, is a bag of coffee. So super light. Probably the only thing lighter is something like those Via packets or some sort of freeze-dried crystal. Coffee's not great. I think it's a little weak sauce personally, and you have a high potential of ending up with a mouthful of grit. Even if you let the coffee sit for a while, you'll still have some floaters in there. But it's cheap, it's easy, and it's a good way to get your caffeine fix, and maybe you're into chewy coffee. So wanted to add that in as one of the easier methods, and not a bad method if you're car camping and maybe you only have 1 or 2 people that drink coffee and you're in a big group. Again, I think if you've got more than 2 people, I would go with the percolator. If you've got a whole bunch, it's relatively easy to make 2 pots in the percolator, or just get yourself a giant percolator. If you're just flying solo or you're a little more worried about weight, the French press is a good option. You can relatively easy make a couple batches of French press, but I found I was having to do 2 French presses to get my wife and I coffee in the morning versus 1 pot from the percolator. So happy camping, happy car camping coffee, nice little ration there, and enjoy your adventures. Big Heavy, signing off.
Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.